Assalamu alaikum, welcome to Game Changer. I'm Maryam Zia. In today's program, we will be talking about the unfolding events in, of course, Bangladesh. In a dramatic turn of events, we witnessed yesterday that Prime Minister Hasina has resigned and fled country after weeks of deadly unrest. We know that thousands of protesters gathered in the streets of Dhaka, and which led to ultimately resignation of Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina. And of course, we also know that in this dramatic turn of events, Army Chief announced the formation of course, interim government. What lies ahead for Bangladesh, we will be talking about in today's program. And of course, we know that this crisis was triggered by a controversial job quota system that has existed in Bangladesh, and this ultimately grew into a larger crisis. How this crisis unfolded, we will be discussing in today's program, and what is going to be happening next in Bangladesh, what it means for people in Bangladesh, and of course for the neighboring countries. We will be exploring all this in today's program. To discuss this and more, we are joined in the studios by Dr. Munawar Hussain, who is international relations expert. Welcome to the program. We're also joined by Mr. Sheharyar, who is analyst. Welcome to the program. And we're joined online by Dr. Muhammad Iqbal Chawala, who is historian and a social scientist. Welcome to the program. Dr. Munawar, let me start with you. First, let's start with the basics. How do you see all these events that, of course, we have been witnessing for quite some time now, that this crisis was unfolding? This started from, of course, this student protest. What were the key factors, in your opinion, that led to ultimate resignation of Sheikh Hasina?
Thank you very much for having me in your show. In social sciences, always we claim that any social phenomena has conflation of causes. So there are a number of causes, but the real background of this issue is that in 1972, Sheikh Mujib and his government, they fixed a specific quota for the people who fight against Pakistan and for their so-called independence. And in 1997, they decided that quota would be extended up to their children as well. And then in 2010, they also decided, the government of Bangladesh, that this quota may be provided to the grandchildren as well. In 2012, there was protest by the youth because they felt…
And this quota was fixed at 15%.
30%.
At the time, right.
30%. 30%. And we know that Bangladesh total population is about 170 million, and out of 170 million, 110 million, they are workers, and each year about 30 million people, they don't have jobs there. So they felt that this is unconstitutional. They started agitation in 2012. And in 2018, government, they introduced reforms. They eliminated this quota, especially for Bangladesh competitive exam for the first class and second class services. Then the grandchildren of so-called freedom fighters, they petitioned in the High Court of the Bangladesh, and they decided in June this year that this is illegal. And the protest again started. Supreme Court gave a decision, and the protesters, they were satisfied, but because of very aggressive and immoral statements given by Hasina Wajid and her ministers, that these are Razakars. Razakars, they were those people who supported Pakistan. They wanted to have a unified country, and their number was about 50,000 in that time. And when Sheikh Mujib came, he decided that they all would be identified, they would be punished. And among them, about 30,000 Razakars, they were identified, 26,000, they were forgiven. But some were hanged, and the last of them, like 6 Razakars who belonged to Jamaat-e-Islami, they were hanged in 2022. Right. But beside this background, there are also a number of other reasons.
Right, we will be exploring those factors later in the program. So Sheharyar, coming to you, in your opinion, Of course, we have been witnessing these student protests for quite some time now, but these would lead to, of course, such a huge phenomenon. We remember some statements given by Sheikh Hasina quite like recently after she won her term in January, that there might be an attempt by the West to oust her government. So what do you make of this, of course?
So, Maryam, when we basically discuss the case study of Bangladesh, it's very interesting. Given the fact that if you look at the overall economy and the growth that Bangladesh has seen,
one of the fastest growing in the region.
One of the fastest, and a lot of like international economists also said that even as compared to India, Bangladesh has some indicators that are even outperforming the economic growth of India. So this like whole spillover of student politics, the politics of agitation, and like people coming out demanding rights, there has to be something that is like missing, that the international community could not really understand or predict. One area that a lot of like British economists were basically saying that around into 2023, the statistics basically say that 11,000 Bengalis who went to the UK, they sought asylum. Now in 2023, if you talk about the statistics coming from the European Union, those number are 40,000. So if Bangladesh is doing economically so well, then why are all of these people going to different countries and seeking asylum? So the answer to that is unequal growth, unequal distribution.
And do you also think, of course, Sheikh Hasina's policies in the past 15 years or overall in the last two decades, do you think she went from a democratic icon to an autocrat? You know, her policies against the way she dealt with the opposition, and of course, like you mentioned, a lot of people had to ultimately sought asylum in different countries.
So, Maryam, this you've like basically put the nail on the head. When Hasina Wajid first like came into politics, she basically moved back the Bangladeshi military, and she was basically the start of the democratic process. During that time, then again she evolved into more of an autocratic ruler as compared to a democratic ruler. So these rising trends of asylum seekers, they're like two. One, they're like economic migrants who basically don't see themselves as a part of the economic bubble, that growth bubble that the Bangladesh is going through. And number two, these are like people who have been persecuted politically. So since 2013, a lot of like Bangladeshi analysts basically say there haven't been free and fair elections since then, and the elections have always been contested. Most of the opposition leaders, including Khaleda Zia, were in jail, and even the latest elections that took place, a lot of like opposition parties had boycotted that election anyways. Now a lot of like statistics coming in, 2.5 million Bangladeshi opposition activists are in jail and like facing judicial charges of one way or the other. 2,500 of them since 2009 have been extrajudicially murdered by the government, and 600 have been enforcefully disappeared. So Sheikh Hasina Wajid was like presiding a system that was built upon blatant human rights violations. A lot of their military
we will be talking about her way of course, ruling the country, and of course, we know that there was rise in economy because it was becoming one of the fastest growing economy in the region and maybe in the world. But at the same time, critics were saying that most of her alliances were beneficiaries of this economic growth. We will be talking about the economic factors, but coming to you, Dr. Iqbal, what do you make of this, of course, unfolding crisis in Bangladesh, and how do you compare it to previous political crises in Bangladesh? Because this is one of the biggest that we have seen. When we look at the death toll, like 300 people have been killed in this. So how do you compare it with the previous political crises in the country?
Thank you very much for having me. Yeah, it's like Pakistan, the Bangladesh history is also the checkered history. You come across, many military coups. Then even the founding father, Sheikh Mujib, was butchered, murdered. after 2 or 3 years. And then you see Hasina Wajid, she was in Germany, she comes to Bangladesh and uh,
Yes, first she
takes
went to
part
India
in
and then she,
politics.
yeah.
Yeah, and then you see the tussle and the cooperation between Zia and Hasina continues. Then they become rivals, and you see till 2009 uh, she already had become prime minister. At that time she had not developed the feeling of revenge and vindictiveness, but after getting 209 two-third majority, somehow she seems to have developed some kind of, like already have mentioned, autocratic behavior, and that transformed her to as a fascist ruler. And in that process, I believe that suddenly, not suddenly, gradually, that the student came out and they demanded abolishment of the quota system, which she could have easily granted already in 2018. It was granted, but unluckily it was gone to the Supreme Court, and Supreme Court lastly also uh, gave verdict in favor of the protesters. So what she made the blunder was she adopted iron and blood policy instead of reconciling it.
Yes,
She
instead of
she
dialogue.
thought that she can suppress the protest, the agitation. Already she had been doing this since 2029. She had been doing this. She was oppressing, clamping press, arresting, journalists, and suppressing opponents, especially Jamaat Islami leaders. The way she hanged, actually, she tried to follow the footstep of her father. Sheikh Mujib may be in a feeling of, in a state of mind that he is going to punish those who did not support the creation of Bangladesh, had adopted that so-called the quota system in the job, but that continued to, enhance. But you see, one has to see it in the regional context, also the global context. Like already have been discussed, that economic policy apparently seems very fine. Apparently seems $40 billion export is earning. That's a big achievement. And that is also that the garment is made of the cotton, which is basically imported from Pakistan, and their industry was developing. But the gap between the rich and the poor kept on enhancing. Then you
Of
see,
course, and of
and
course, with the youth unemployment increasing by every year, despite being one of the fastest growing economies, of course, this was one of the factors. But of course, let me take the discussion to the studios. Dr. Munawar, what do you make of Sheikh Hasina's political career in the past 2 decades? Her rise as a democratic icon and her ultimate fall, where she had to flee to, of course, India, and now she would be moving to UK for political asylum. And also, we know that his son is saying that she might not be returning to politics because she's so disappointed. And she is claiming that this is only a minority group that gathered against her. So what do you make of all this context?
In our academia, we used to discuss about realist school of thought, and it says that if you have a power, you would become corrupt, and if you have absolute power, you would become absolutely corrupt. She was democratic, no doubt in it, and she gave a growth to the Bangladeshi economy, $2,600 per person. It was per capita income. I mean, this is a very good income, especially in the region. But because of certain reasons, as I already mentioned, like inequality, injustice, dictatorship, very harsh statement against the demonstrators, as well as excessive depending on India. One of the very important reasons that why protesters, they were so violent because they felt infuriated because of Indian interference into their politics. And since last year, I was predicting that in this region, India is going to be isolated. Why? Because they have enmity with the Maldives because of Mohammed Mizu's movement of India out. They have border dispute with the Nepal, and they have differences on the map. They want to capture one of the very important island of Sri Lanka. They have enmity with Pakistan. So all Indian neighboring states who are also the neighboring states of China, they have a friendly relationship with China, but they have enmity with India.
Right.
So
But at the same time, Dr. Saab, when we see statements coming out from India regarding all this unfolding of the situation in Bangladesh, this is very like they were saying that this is internal matter of Bangladesh. Although we know that only in the past month or so, she visited India twice. So, and she ultimately is meeting the intelligentsia there. So, do you think this was one of the factors that India was meddling, and also is a common Bangladeshi aware of that, and was it impacting, and in what way was it impacting a common Bangladeshi?
we know if any country who interfere into their internal politics, the people definitely they would object on it. Even United States of America, if they came to know that Russians they are intervening into their politics and presidential election, or Chinese they are interfering, I mean they don't like it. So the Bangladeshi people, and we know that the moment she was airlifted and she went to India, she met with Ajit Doval,
yes.
and even Jay Shankar met with Modi, Jay Shankar met with Rahul Gandhi, Jay Shankar met with Ajit Doval. So even their media, if look at their media, Arnab Swami, I mean he is blaming that Pakistan and Chinese they are behind this all conspiracy what happened in Bangladesh.
But Sheikh Hasina's statement, I remember that she said when she was elected back in January that some white man talked to her regarding bases in Bangladesh, and they are now would be trying to oust her government. So do you think she saw it coming, although she was just elected?
One of the very important personality of Bangladesh, who is Nobel laureate as well, he said that this is not because of the outsiders. It is all because of the blunders of the Hasina Wajid. She actually ruined the legacy of her father by having this dictatorship. I mean, the way she crushed the opposition, the way she used the excessive power against the protesters, the way she even created the inequality in a society. I already mentioned that
Right.
if something like if there are 3,000 jobs by the Public Service Commission of Bangladesh, 6 lakh applications are coming for this 6,000 jobs. So I mean there is a frustration. There is a frustration in Bangladesh society.
And Sheharyar, do you think that lack of jobs in private sector was one of the factors that, of course, a lot of youth was dependent on these civil services or government jobs? And also, what are the immediate economic impacts on Bangladesh of all this unfolding political crises or events?
So Maryam, as mentioned earlier,
Because we know that there was curfew that is going to be lifted today.
Sheikh Hasina's whole legacy was more authoritarian, is based on authoritarianism, and even this whole growth, which is called economic bubble growth, was benefiting a certain class of Bangladeshis. These certain class of Bangladeshis were very aligned with the ruling government, like businessmen, Awami League, like businessmen, bureaucrats, and people who are considered close to the government. So these certain groups were the ones who economically benefited a lot, and majority of the Bangladeshi population, they felt disenfranchised, and they were out of this like whole economic bubble of growth. So they felt that they are not part of this whole economic growth that is like being seen and is being taunted to the rest of the world. When it comes to whole India's role, I was looking at the Bangladeshi media, and like a lot of like international opinions that have like come out of this whole process is that there is a perception that Bangladeshis now believe that India is like more close to the Awami League as compared to Bangladesh, And the visuals that came out, that once Hasina Wajid had to flee her own country, the helicopter took her first to India. Okay, and now she's like trying to seek asylum in obviously European countries as well. And there's like discussion on that. And I don't know whether that asylum would be approved or not, given that there would be trials taking place on blatant human rights violations. So that would also put the international community at risk if they start like giving asylum to people who are like, 300 people, mostly youth, killed in the last like 2 or 3 weeks.
And 30 children as
30
well.
children, and this is unprecedented. In developing countries, such incidents there are unprecedented. Countries that are going through a war-like situation, they basically go through
We're
situations
talking
like
about,
this.
of course, its impact on the regional countries and regional neighbors as well. But Dr. Saab, Dr. Iqbal, when we talk about interim government, in your opinion, what are the main challenges, immediate challenges that the government is going to be, of course, facing in restoring peace and stability in the country?
Number one challenge is to restore law and order issue in Bangladesh. Number one. Number two, to take on board these stakeholders, especially the children, the boys or students who had their genuine demand. Thirdly, to set up that kind of interim government which could be acceptable to these stakeholders, and that already have mentioned Dr. Muhammad, the Nobel laureate can be the head of executive government, interim government. Another challenging could be to satisfy those who were the supporters of Hasina Moin, and because they were, they belong to the elite class, and they are now in the system as well. For last 50 years, the government, single party government, especially after 2009, had been placing these people into important places, positions. So therefore, they would try to create hurdle. And I'm afraid if the army is not backing them fully, it can lead towards civil war. Because already there are signs of civil war, like Hasina Wajid had issued so irresponsible statements urging her supporter to come out and to confront them, which is absolutely nonsense. Already you mentioned here 300 plus youngsters have been killed, and many of them are injured as well. So economic condition is not excellent. Economic condition need to be repaired, and Hasina Wajid wanted probably the $5 billion for the bailout program. Unemployment is a big issue, but unemployment could be like these boys were demanding the government jobs. Already the Bangladesh industry, because of this few weeks protest, would be, I think, hurt, would be damaged. But of course, if the peace is restored,
Imposed for, of course, 15 days. Internet was black. There was complete shutdown of communication as well. Dr. Munawar, when we talk about all these challenges that are, of course, going to be faced by the interim government, and now a lot of people, a lot of protesters that are on streets, they are now planning to stay on the streets until their demands are met. And of course, one of their key demands is seeking justice for those killed in these, of course, violence that unfolded in the past few days, and particularly Sunday night. So what do you think who would be the key figures in the interim government, and would they be acceptable to the people of Bangladesh?
I think technocrats, because in the West we are observing that liberalism has become liberal itself, and they are giving preference to the technocrats. If they want to keep the growth of Bangladesh up, they have to bring the technocrats. Why I am saying this? Because the confidence of the opposition is just missing, the way they were cornered in the past. And I also believe that the protesters, they are not only seeking the justice about their fellow guys who were killed during this protest, but at the same time they are targeting the army chief as well. Because there is 40 minutes documentary given by Al Jazeera, and they declared army chief as a man of Hasina Wajid, a close relative. And one of the very important challenge that I feel would be how to restore democracy in the country and how to restore the confidence of the opposition.
And what are the prospects of free and fair elections in Bangladesh?
Look, in such situation, it is quite possible the argument might be given by the Bangladesh army and the bureaucrats that we experienced democracy, and this just what happened with the Bangladesh. So I think the way the developments occurred there, and the situation in the region, especially the growing China and tension between China and United States of America, and the Indian designs, in that case Bangladesh is a very important country. How they are dealing with that challenge, I think that would be a daunting task for the army at this moment. But how they are restoring confidence for themselves, and how they are restoring the confidence of the opposition, and how they are giving confidence to the young people that look, the justice would be made and you would get the right share.
Right. And when we talk about, of course, change in leadership, Sheharyar, how do you think that this change of leadership might be impacting Bangladesh foreign policy, especially towards India and China and of course US as well?
So Maryam, there are like three main contenders, or three, I would say, takeaways that the world needs to realize as well. Number one is the will of the people has to be respected. Even yesterday, Hasina Zia was promptly released.
Yes.
Now the student protesters are also asking, Muhammad Yunus to step in, who's the Nobel laureate and who was also barred from contesting in the elections.
And also is being considered to head
the technocratic setup that
setup,
has to be.
yes.
But one thing that we need to realize that the democratic process should never be derailed. And there are chances when there is a coup of this sort that how long will this technocratic setup persist? So all of these oppositions that basically had boycotted the elections that recently took place, which brought Hasina Wajid back to the foray, what we need to see is how long will this technocratic setup stay. Even yesterday their army chief basically said that.
And do you think this technocratic setup would be acceptable to the people of Bangladesh?
So that is where the whole reconciliation process will be starting. So that will basically entail a very free and fair truth and reconciliation commission that has to be set up. The voice of the youth has to be taken on board when the whole new setup is taking place. So will this be a closed door exercise, or will it be inclusive? That will basically set the direction on how things will be going forward in the next few days. Now the international community, most of the statements that have been coming from Europe, from China, from even Russia, that all of these countries are basically saying that the democratic process should not be derailed in favor of any technocratic setup that persists, and the voices of the people are not included in the democratic process.
Right. And how do you see at this point in time public sentiments towards military's involvement in formation of an interim government?
So until yesterday, when the military stepped in, the people seemed to have welcomed them, but this is how it generally happens. But now, how long will the military stay? And starting from yesterday, the clock has started backwards. The longer the military stays and the longer that the free and fair elections are stalled, the military's image in front of the people will also start deteriorating.
Keeping in mind the history.
Keeping in mind the history that people were not really satisfied with military rule, and that is when Hasina Wajid basically came and she made her space in the area. When it comes to China, historically China has been seen or viewed by the Bangladeshi people as a power that does not really have any favorites in Bangladesh. This is opposed to what their view is about India. India was considered very close to the Awami League, which again now is not really liked by the people, and this did not give good visuals even when Hasina Wajid flew to India. And again, the rest of the countries, even with China, they have this history. If we take the example from Myanmar, they talk to all opposition parties. And this is the time when national unity is needed, in which the minorities in which the opposition parties that have historically been disenfranchised and targeted by Hasina Wajid's party, they all should come and sit on the table and then collectively decide on what the framework of the future trajectory, especially keeping in mind democratic ideals, that should be like taking place.
Right.
And develop an economic system which is more inclusive in nature rather than exclusionary. And certain obviously interest groups which have historically been aligned with the Awami League, they also like need to realize that the growth will only benefit when it's inclusive.
Right.
And when the marginalized communities are not persecuted by the state and they're included in the democratic or development processes.
So dialogue is going to be an important factor in coming days. And Dr. Iqbal, how do you see the long-term implications of Sheikh Hasina's resignation for democracy in Bangladesh?
It will depend how the future interim government or elected government follow the policy of reconciliation. Instead of becoming revengeful or vindictive, they need to include all those who are citizens of Bangladesh, irrespective of who was with Hasina Wajid or against her. And secondly, it will also depend how they can satisfy with the student demands or the underprivileged people. And it will also depend how sincerely and honestly they implement the verdict of the decision of the Supreme Court regarding the quota system. And one thing is very clear, that the Bangladeshi people wanted democracy, and democratic norms should be flourished in Bangladesh, which is a very difficult task as well, given that even Sheikh Mujibur Rahman could not follow the true principle of democracy. Then you see time and again the military intervened. Then Khalda Zia versus Hasina Wajid. Now the Hasina Wajid for last 15 years, because of her autocratic and authoritative nature, especially after her victory in 2024, two-thirds majority, which everybody knows that how big and large-scale rigging and malpractices were done to become that kind, that intoxicated her. So they need to avoid that kind of landslide victories or giving somebody so much powers so that he or she can become authoritative and adopt a fascist approach. I think that the role of army would be very important. Secondly,
Right.
the technocrat government should be honest, because the corruption charges in every government were very common. And even Hasina Wajid's son is notorious for looting money, and Hasina herself was engaged in so many scandals and scams. So I think the future government should learn lesson from history and become more sensible in reinforcing, re-implementing democracy.
Right, that is very important. But Dr. Saab, when we talk about the role of military in Bangladesh in current crisis, how do you compare it from the previous crisis, and how the public in Bangladesh is going to be viewing this in, of course, coming days?
If we see the history of Bangladesh and their people, they always they have a democratic cult. They remain very agitative, and this is good sign for democracy as well, because in democracy we believe that the role of opposition is a favor in a sense, because it identifies the gray areas. And what the blunder Hasina Wajid committed, she crushed the opposition.
And that ultimately cost her government, after just 7-8 months.
Exactly, because this is not the task of the people of a country that give vote once in 5 years and just you are free from
the turnout was around 40%. That is one of the factors.
Because opposition was nothing there.
Of course.
I mean, it was crushed.
Sheharyar, in your opinion, what were the key missteps that Sheikh Hasina took that ultimately led to her, of course, resignation? And what lessons can other countries in the world with huge, of course, unemployment rates can learn from this unfolding situation in Bangladesh?
So, Maryam, clearly, I agree with Dr. Saab here that the decimation of the opposition parties obviously was a major dent in the democratic process that was like taking place in Bangladesh. Other than that, after even that, blatant human rights violations without following any sort of rule of law. And again, hanging on to certain ideals since 1971 and playing on those ideals and continuously using those to persecute opposition parties. I think like people of Bangladesh have like moved on from that. The young people, the youth of Bangladesh, they want economic stakes in the development that is taking place. Even though last year we've like forgotten to mention it that Bangladesh also turned to IMF for support. So this clearly states or like says that 180 million people of Bangladesh, not all are benefiting from the myopic growth, I would say, or authoritarian based growth that certain economic groups or certain stakeholders aligned with the Awami Party, they were reaping the benefits of the growth. Again, that led to massive corruption as well, scandals as well. They will be unearthed in the coming days. So the greatest lesson that we can basically learn here, that democracy is very strong in Bangladesh. People came out, they gave their lives, over 300 lives to oust Hasina Wajid, and for good, I'm basically saying. Even right now, her son, if we look at meddling powers like India, they're still in the process of blaming Pakistan and not like reflecting internally on the breeding ground on which this whole revolution was based on. And again, now that the future direction of Bangladesh will be determined in the coming days, the greatest lesson that we can learn is any growth that is not inclusive. And this Pakistan also and all South Asian countries or developing countries can learn. Any growth that is not inclusive, any population that does not reap the benefits of growth will always be disenfranchised, and they would always be resisting any investments or any growth coming into an area where they will feel that they will not be benefiting out of that growth. And this is the lesson that needs to be learned, that now when all this democratic process will be taking place, and the youth of Bangladesh will have a major role in deciding what direction Bangladesh will be going through.
Of course, youth is going to be playing an important role like they did in these, of course, protests as well. But lastly, Dr. Iqbal, what do you think would be the role of international organizations in ensuring a peaceful transition to a democratic government system in Bangladesh?
Yes, UN can play important role. SARC is equally very important platform, and Human Rights Watch and other NGOs, for instance, they have been pointing out the shortcoming and large-scale, misuse of abuse of powers by Hasina Wajid. But now, I think what I have learned from history is that what happened in Glorious Revolution 1688, when the people of England realized that they are being dictated by France, Catholic country, they agitated and they came out of the homes and brought the Glorious Revolution in 1688. Similarly, in Iranian Revolution in 1979, the Iranian felt that they have been dictated by the Americans. So therefore, the result. Here again, that the Bangladeshi people, a very sizable people, believe that whether some were agitating or not, their internal and external policies are being dictated by Delhi. So therefore, the people did not like it. Now, what we want the world could do is they can request and also make these interventionist countries to let the Bangladesh address their issues or challenges, internal or externals, by themselves, instead
Right.
of instead
Depending
of
on
making
external
them
powers, of
parasites.
course. Right, right. Thank you very much, Dr. Muhammad Iqbal Chawala, for joining us in today's program. Thank you very much, Dr. Munawar Hussain, for joining us in today's program. Thank you very much, Mr. Sheharyar Khan, for joining us in today's program. Of course, when we talk about this unfolding situation in Bangladesh, the job of interim and subsequent government would be extremely challenging, of course, to ensuring the economic stability in the country, and that would be possible with the participation of course, youth and of course people of Bangladesh in decision making process. That's all from Game Changer tonight. Take care. Allah Hafiz.